What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to Gin and Tantra, Spirituality with a Twist. You have Daniel with you today, driving the mothership, if you will, or the flagship, perhaps, or the battleship, I think we'll call it today. Eric is off doing something, I'm sure, and so we are once again joined by a friend of the show and friend of myself, Christian Villacres. Christian is an acupuncturist and a kung fu teacher and a student of many things and a teacher of many more in the local Chicagoland area. So we'll have his information in the bio or in the beginning of this episode for sure. This is kind of a continuation of our previous conversation from whenever the episode will be published previously to this. So it might be some days or a week, I don't know, but this is a continuation. And last time we had sort of dug into this idea of therapy or healing through catharsis. And we sort of gave some various, what do you saw, descriptions or definitions of types of therapy. And we sort of broke those down a little bit for those who, are catching this, and for those who heard it, this is just a brief recap. But then we wanted to make the pivot to cultivation. As we had talked about, catharsis is the beginning stages of a healing process. And I think you and I both agree that that was a very important part. And it was your contention that people often get stuck in this cathartic loop. We didn't use that term last time, but we can certainly use it today. And that they end up remaining there. And that doesn't really give people the opportunity to look forward. I believe that was kind of your point.
Well, I think the cathartic loop is a nice phrase, and I might steal that and use that in the future.
Please.
Uh, and I think the cathartic loop kind of just points back to maybe one of the basic characteristics of our culture, which is instant gratification. Um,
Yes.
you know, in the holistic medical fields, it's always interesting because people come from the allopathic or the pharmaceutical like backgrounds, and they're used to getting external things that they can take that will hopefully at least have the promise of making them feel better without them really having to do much of anything.
Mm,
Um, so we're easily conditioned into, wanting, I think, quick solutions, right, to our
totally.
pressing problems. And you know, catharsis, just like, in maybe in a distorted way, like just like a cheap thrill, is kind of easy to get a quick high that helps you feel a little bit better for the time
Sure.
being, but doesn't actually provide much substance for longstanding change. And then cultivation practices, which, in another way, I think would even also encompass things like shadow work, it takes a lot of discipline and compassion to do that self-facing work.
Hmm.
And that's where I think the work of coaching um, starts to come in a slightly different way than maybe traditional therapy. But obviously, fields are always evolving, and I don't want to try to pigeonhole therapy as something that's stagnant.
Sure.
Um, but allowing, or at least finding ways to help people move past the feeling better just for a little bit,
Yeah.
coping their way through life, and then actually getting to a place where you've released enough that you can feel unburdened enough to make some real changes in your life.
Mm.
And I've just noticed that with a lot of patients and clients, once they start to feel better, the
Impetus.
the impetus or the urgency for having to do the work starts to go away.
Totally.
And that is one of the most dangerous moments. And I try to remind people all the time. It's like, and not in a fear-mongering way,
No,
but
yeah.
just set expectations. It's like, yes, like today we are up, and it is totally normal if tomorrow we are down. Um, People have a tendency to think they're going to stay stuck down here, or be afraid that they're not going to be able to stay up here.
Hmm. Hmm.
So. Yeah, I
Well,
mean, going
well,
off on a tangent there, but
yeah, let me say a couple things. One, so what you're talking about from a, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Neurochemical level is the difference between dopamine and serotonin,
sure.
right? So for those who are unfamiliar, what Christian is talking about after, one does something of short-term release, you get a hit of dopamine, right? Your phone, you get a notification on your phone, or someone texts you, or you get an email, or, something like this. You smoke a cigarette, whatever the case is. Or, and what Christian is talking about is, you have a cathartic kind of a release. And in the short run, yes, it feels good. There's no doubt about it. But it is only had with decreasing returns, only experience with decreasing returns. And so it doesn't give you the same feedback loop to keep you going back to it. So you have to increase it, you have to change it, you have to do something more to keep you returning to it to give you that same kind of dopamine hit, or we could say, feedback loop, right? This cathartic loop. On the other hand, you have more practice-based experiences which build over time and don't give you as much short-term excitement, if you will. Those are more what they call serotonin-based, things that make you feel good over a longer period of time because you're doing these things over and over and over again. And
Mhm.
so the discrepancy between these two is finding the stuff that gives you something when you do it, but then also helps you to grow as your feedback from it diminishes. And then, like you're saying, you can help people to see beyond the gap, because there inevitably will be a gap there, whether it's a learning curve or something neurochemical, right? That you no longer get the same hit that you did when you did something. But then what you were talking about is stepping in and saying, hey, person X, understand that you are feeling good right now, but there's going to be a little bit of a dip before the next level of experience comes in, the next level of mastery or whatever takes over, and you start getting rewards from the whatever meditation that you're doing, or the art class that you're finally enjoying after 6 weeks of hating it. You know what I'm saying? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
exactly. Before we started recording, we were talking about pranayama and we were talking about building pressure in the different chambers of the body and creating the
So you
conditions.
gotta you gotta open that up a little bit. We got a wide audience. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so before we started recording, we were talking about traditional breathwork practices
Yes.
and talking about how to use breath to literally increase pressure inside of the body. And using that image, catharsis, in any form, whether it's, going through your phone or smoking a cigarette or, a cheap, quick orgasm, whatever it might be that makes you feel better right away.
You know, I want to do the thing from that movie, but I won't.
What?
The $5,
Right. But so all of this stuff is all these practices or all of these, let's say not practices, all these behaviors uh,
Yes,
are releasing, are just like a pressure cooker, are releasing pressure or venting the system. Right. And so a cathartic release allows you to prevent pressure out of the system, whereas cultivation practices help to build a stronger furnace.
sure.
That the stronger furnace can take that pressure and work with it without exploding and create something alchemical through that process. Like creating a diamond under pressure in simpler terms.
Give it,
Uh,
give me a little bit more practical. You know what I mean? So give me a little bit one more layer of practicality from this.
well, I mean, perhaps it's just, I mean, maybe I don't know if this is what you mean by practicality, but it's about developing resilience.
Okay.
And I don't mean that from like oh, you got to be tough. It's more so of you. I think it's more so you have to love yourself enough to keep getting stronger to be able to keep going through more lessons and keep evolving. You talked about when someone hits that gap between the dopamine and the serotonin, clinically or professionally, I think more so than even just giving someone information in that space. It's like just to be there in that gap to catch
Sure.
people, and to be there for them to catch them until they get strong enough and develop a broad enough awareness around themselves and their own actions to
Mm-hmm.
catch themselves preemptively.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is the coaching work, really. And that's why like coaching work is ultimately so different than therapy. Um, my coaching clients, it's, the boundaries are probably should probably be stronger in many ways, but there's so much support, and there's so much communication that takes place because you are literally helping people escape codependent tendencies and develop their own independent tendencies.
Yeah, well, I think you said it quite well just a minute ago, resiliency,
Hmm.
developing resiliency. And resiliency, like you mentioned, comes through loving oneself. And but we could say maybe even in a larger scale, if that's abstract for folks. I enjoy, for those who don't already know my psychology, I'm also learning it simultaneously. I enjoy breaking things down as mundane as I can because it helps me to understand even my own self. You know what I'm saying? And so if loving oneself doesn't equate in terms of developing resilience, then we can say you can develop patience, you can develop forgiveness, right? And each of those it comes along with a secret strength, right? So it's not about becoming tough as in what the traditional idea of tough is, right? Strong, rigid, kind of inflexible, right? The typical what we consider like alpha person, male or female or whatever.
Western strong.
Western strong, right, right. But that's not what we're talking about because if anybody's ever done any like martial arts or sports or just life, you will realize very soon that there are plenty people who are stronger than you, and they are often in your in your vicinity. And so it becomes less about competing with others and more about, like you said, developing your own self resiliency. And the difficult parts are, at least in my for me in my own understanding of this, it really is a lot about like self-love, compassion, resiliency, patience, all these different kinds of things that help you to be more flexible. And in your flexibility, you become stronger. You end up becoming, yeah, I mean, the word is resilient. You can bounce back from things. It doesn't break you. It molds you. You know what I mean?
Well, I think part of becoming that kind of resilient and flexible, embracing that bend and don't break, is
Yeah.
feeling whole. And
Yeah.
when we don't feel whole, when we don't love ourselves in wholeness, there are parts of ourselves that we hate or that we loathe for one reason or another. And those, like, the unfolding of shame that comes through there and how that influences us.
Well, let's keep it real. Tell me a little bit about yours, about your journey here, because you and I think both are people who can feel comfortable, confident, and capable. Oh my God, those I love when things start with the same letter. I like that so much. You know what I'm saying? Um, but feel comfortable, confident, and capable of leading people to places that we have been or through situations that we have been through and they are in a similar scenario, right? We can do other things for sure, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel very comfortable doing that in that way because I can say not only do I have some education around this, but I also have firsthand experience. I only know what it's like to be me, but I can say for sure, here's what I did in this situation, which seems to be a little bit similar to yours. And in this way, we get to have our life and our own experience inform our practice, which is the beauty, part of the beauty in the life and the work that we have chosen, if I'm speaking for
Yeah,
you.
no, I agree. I mean, I think Education aside, right? We've obviously, like, we're both doctors in our field, and we have a lot of education, a lot of clinical experience. And if
Hmm.
we wanted to work just from textbook experience and knowledge, we could do so and have probably much more simple practices
Sure.
um, that, um, yeah, and just have much more simple, straightforward, mundane types of practices. I think both you and I understand that healing is very interconnected and nonlinear, and that, and I know both you and I obviously have our own spiritual inclinations, which make us prone to see the multidimensionality of people's afflictions. Um, and so I guess I feel like in my own life, I have been lucky enough to have had the opportunity to become aware of myself at various stages, and to become aware of myself, um, repeating unconscious patterns over decades of time, and have been able to see how those unconscious behaviors that I had that were part of my personality, um, were based were causing me a lot of harm,
Do
I guess.
you do you feel comfortable giving an example?
Sure. I mean, I think the very simplest and probably most universal example is that my um, challenges around love and self-worth that originated around my relationships with my parents, and the issues around my family dynamics, made it challenging for me, um, on top of other things like on top of other cultural issues and
Sure.
being culturally misplaced in much of my upbringing, made it difficult for me as I grew up to feel comfortable that I was worthy of love. And
Mm,
so I spent many, 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 many years, like literally decades, um, with this very deep feeling that took me a long time to put into words, that no one was ever going to love me, and that I was not good enough the way that I was. And so I had to become something better than I was and convince the people around me that I was something else so that they would love me more.
mm,
Which meant that I entered into a lot of relationships, with not being able to be genuinely myself because I wasn't worthy, so I had to be something better. I also, it gave me terrible boundaries because I would give away of myself excessively, because I didn't think I would be wanted otherwise. Um,
mhm.
and you know, that pattern of that pattern of self-reflection, also made it difficult for me to have the confidence to succeed professionally. It made it challenging for me to feel comfortable socially. Like,
Mhm.
these factors compounded over the years.
Mhm.
And it took basically going through a very challenging breakup, that was now three times familiar,
Mm.
to really snap me out of it and be like, I'm doing something here and I can't do this anymore. And so, not to rant on about this, but my own personal experience in becoming aware of my own negative self-perception, um, allowed me, or not allowed me, but it opened the door for me to go on a journey of doing my first layers of like personal shadow work,
Sure.
which allowed me to start to let go of a lot of things that I didn't know I was holding on to. And like I
Yeah.
think in our earlier call, like, you can't let go of something that you haven't been able to name and give some
Yes. Yep.
functional label to.
Correct.
And so, um, I dove head in, and I think for karmic reasons, I think I was given certain gifts that I was able to dive into shadow work and feel at home in it once I got in there. And I was able to then, in my own way, over several years, really go through quite a journey of unraveling my own childhood conditioning, understanding my larger family's like immigrant journey and the way that that's influenced the
Mm-hmm.
evolution of our family values influenced my perception on reality, and how those limitations really created a lot of constraint, provided a lot of positive foundation for sure, but also a lot of constraint. And so a massive part of the healing journey for me, which has ultimately spread into the entirety of my family, truly, has been letting go of all of these constraints,
Yeah.
uh, and becoming uh,
More you.
more me, more free at different
Yeah.
levels. And
And
so
so these are we have so we've been we've talked about this we talked this about little bit about this last time, this idea of the false self, and Eric and I have mentioned this before, this thing called the emotional plague, which we have mentioned numerous times. Psychologist Wilhelm Reich talks about this emotional plague, right, and the contagion of ideas that are floating around in the world, in the culture, and the lexicon of our shared language, that push people to do what you are talking about exactly. Create something that is not you, but you are doing it because you believe you made an agreement with yourself that you can receive love based on an exchange,
mhm.
or receive attention, or what we can call it, however you want to however you want to dissect love, we'll do it, right? But that, like, ultimately that self is not authentically who you are. And the dissolving, right, the cathartic portion of it, the dissolving of that false self is the first step in finding out who it is that you are authentically first. And in addition to that, we've also, Eric and I have been talking over the last couple of months about these like 9 Taoist obstacles that will fuck up your life, as we like to say. And you mentioned a couple of them. First one, being smothered by parental demands. The second obstacle, being bound by love and attachment, even in your story, which were not even authentic representations of who you are, still bound by love and attachment. That's the third obstacle. We have a couple more episodes to do to finish to get to the rest of the 9, and our upcoming book, Jin and Tantra: Spirituality with a Twist, in paperback, will be written at some point this year. But those are some of the things that we're talking about. But why I wanted you to share is because, without prompting you, without asking you, when you just talked, this is the experience that has been written about by numerous people over, and these Taoist obstacles are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. Wilhelm Reich was around in the 50s. Like, these types of shared experiences are shared, and they are part of the journey. And so we wanted to highlight this in order to move the conversation towards the cultivation aspect, if we can do that. So I wanted to
Yeah.
say, in a good practitioner's way, thank you for sharing your story. It is unique to you, but is shared by many people. And you mentioned Joseph Campbell last time, and we've mentioned our Uncle Joe here numerous times. But the hero with 1,000 faces. This is the story of time immemorial, is somebody going through their own particular hero's journey and coming out the other side. And what you and I are saying is, let's work towards getting to the other side. And then your work is not done. Your work is just as intense on that side as it is on this side. It just looks different.
Well, you enter a different archetypical role
Yeah.
once you come out the other side of the hero's journey,
Yeah.
Uh, but I guess we're leaning into the cultivation part here. A lot of people I've witnessed coming in for treatment, right? And treatment is inherently somewhat of a cathartic practice.
Totally.
Don't even know that the hero's journey exists. They don't even know that it's an option in life.
Yes.
They don't even know that they can think of themselves in such a way that their life is even a story to be told, and that maybe they could even be the authors of it themselves
Mm-hmm.
versus along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last time. I think we said, like, becoming the conscious author of your
Mhm.
own existence. Yeah.
So, cultivation, when I first say the word cultivation, because of my history, the first thing that comes to mind is like, daily qigong practice and with, mindful movement and mindful breathing and mindful mind. Um, and that's all well and good, if you're into that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But if you're not into that kind of stuff, then that might not be all well and good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you and I are both sort of fans of traditions, but I think we encounter a lot of people who aren't ready to dive headfirst into traditional practices,
Yeah.
start their cultivation. And my cultivation, when I work with people on a cultivation practice, a lot of it starts off with daily ritual.
Mm.
Um, so, maybe I'm pushing my own agenda here, but I
No,
have my
push it. Listen, because here's part of this. This is informational, right? It's mildly entertaining, and occasionally there's some humor, but it's probably pretty shitty. You know what I'm saying? But you can totally have this as a reference for people.
so my interest, ever since I was probably 13, 14 years old, I was interested in Eastern philosophies. And I've always been very drawn um, to the elegant simplicity that hides the complexity of Taoism. And Taoism, in its, again, super simple ways, recognizes the cycles of nature and recognizes where all of the smaller cycles of life fall within the greater cycles of nature. And somewhere within that, if you can be a great sage of the cycles of nature, then you're just a master of time, really. Um, and you sort of sit and watch the wheels of time moving and knowing when to act and when to do nothing, which is the doing and the non-doing.
Mm-hmm.
That is super cool. Um, but in honor of that mentality, in honor of the cycles, and in honor that we, as a part of nature, might feel better if our behavioral cycles align with the cycles of nature, then maybe we'll feel like we're part of the flow instead of chaotic. And
Mm-hmm.
so I ask people to acknowledge first that we live within wheels, cycles within cycles, years,
Mm-hmm.
months, weeks, days, hours. And then to start by honoring and living in accordance, in a mindful accordance with the cycle that most influences us, which is the daily cycle. And so for a basic cultivation practice, that starts off with developing a morning routine and an evening routine to help to create meaningful repetition, which gradually over time cultivates something in the same way like we're talking about maybe 3 or 4 months into it, all of a sudden the maintenance of your daily altar provides you low level constant joy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the first thing I really look into for cultivation is slowing down the mind, bringing it into focus around daily rituals, and then allowing the ritual to create stillness so that the stillness can cultivate something. Maybe we can call it presence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for some people, that's enough for just a month, honestly, because that's a lot for someone to even wrap their head around as well. What are the elements of a ritual for me? What is meaningful for me in the aesthetic of my life that adds richness to my life that I would want to even bring into something that I would ritualize, you know? Not everyone's into burning incense or, like saying a mantra or like doing a prayer or something, Maybe it has to be something more unique or specific to you.
Mm-hmm. It should be.
Yeah, exactly. Of
It
course.
it should be.
It
Yeah.
has
It
to be
it should
meaningful.
be.
That has to be
Well,
meaningful.
But what you just said is what I do every day. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that sounds good. Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, I do some version of that as well, you know?
Yeah, totally. But good being practitioners, or let's just say being sensitive to other people, we are aware that one size does not fit all. And the goal is not to have um, a dogmatic approach, but something that is applicable to many people, right? And that means that our approach has to change based on who we're talking to, who we're working with. So while, saying a mantra or, burning some incense would be, like you said, good for some, not good for others, but I'm not particularly attached to having somebody do something in the way that I tell them to do it. I'm far more interested in having somebody say, I tried what you recommended. It didn't work. I didn't do it, but I found this instead. And that to me, I'm like, yes, you did. It's less about what and more about how.
Hmm.
And if somebody can take something that I, bring to them as a suggestion and find it, like you're saying, a way that's better for them, for their own life in their own way, well, then that's ultimately when you can see the beginning of some change happening for that person, that things start to take hold.
But this, not this, hopefully this won't go too off topic, but this goes into the subject of tradition and lineage, which you and I have talked about a
Yeah,
little.
I'm listening.
Um, I feel like you and I, just in our own lives and our own personal journeys, have had our own practices, which are very nonlinear and very eclectic, that have all collectively served to facilitate our um, any number of awakening experiences that we may have had.
Sure.
And so we
What do you
can,
mean? But for people who are listening again, because we got our audience is wide, so
so I guess
awakening experiences open this up a little bit.
when I say an awakening experience, I guess I mean a peak experience of altered consciousness. So maybe that'll be through like intense breath work, maybe that'll be through intense meditation, maybe it would be through a plant medicine ceremony, any, you know, um, yeah, a non-dual state of consciousness. I don't know how else maybe you can elaborate for me.
Yeah. Let me try a little bit. So I want for people who are listening to this to not feel as if they don't have a peak experience, that there is not still some motivation to continue what they're doing, right? What we're talking about, dopamine and serotonin in this case. But really, when it's at its finest, it's both. So you get this regular feedback, positive feedback, because you're cultivating a sense of mastery and a sense of closeness, a sense of repetition in a way with something that's opening and furthering your practice and your experience more and more. But then you get to reap the rewards of that, right? Not just the change that comes internally within your own psycho-emotional state, but then also externally in your life, in the way that you deal with actions and reactions to certain things, and how you think and process, and feel and all of this. And so if someone doesn't understand the concept of a peak experience, I guess I could say and be like, in a small moment, they will say there are the tantric view of things, the Buddhist view of things, well, the tantric view really will say that there are some moments in life where you can have a peak experience, right? So an orgasm is one. The tip of a sneeze, that moment right before you sneeze is another one. The the peak of a yawn is another one. The moment upon sleeping, the moment upon waking, the moment upon death, right? Um, and I can even add like epiphanies, right? The space between thoughts where you'll get something, oh, or maybe if I could say, when you learn something new, you're like an epiphany, you learn something new, or even if you remember something, which to me, I could do a whole podcast on that right there, because they're the same feeling, but they're two different ways. Anyways,
But you're
so
illustrating the point right now, though, right? Because the point I guess I was trying to make is that, we have we've had a lot of personal experience in having those states of consciousness.
Yes.
And so we've been able to help people have their own experiences of those
Fine.
states of consciousness in the exact same way that you probably just helped some listeners have those experiences of consciousness by listing off mundane access points to that, like the
Sure.
yawn,
Sure.
right? All of those resonate with me. And so you are serving as a vehicle for the taste of awakening.
Okay.
Um, and these are all practices or things that have meaning and significance to you, which you can share with others. If they don't have meaning and significance, then it's just a tradition and you're just doing what your teacher told you because your teacher
Fair.
told you to.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the part of the coaching process, I guess, is helping people find out what's theirs, you
Yeah.
know, cultivating their, like, I give you my path, but only just for a little while until you can make your own. I don't want you to walk my path. Um,
Yes.
and I guess is sort of where I was going to with that.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And but even there is challenging, right? Because the same practices might not have the same effect in the same way as they have had on us, you know. But sort of getting back to like a practical route, I started off with cultivation with this idea of ritual and routine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that really is mostly in taking a higher executive function level role in shaping the way that your mind is operating through its daily tasks and through its daily presence,
Yeah.
which is maybe another characteristic of being that not everyone even knows is available to them, to develop a higher self voice that is guiding maybe lower self throughout the day. Um,
Say more about that.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons why in earlier parts of my practice, I was so big on the the ice baths and the cold showers and stuff like that, was because I was intentionally using that experience to split my consciousness to develop a higher level of awareness that can talk to myself through difficulty and
Mm,
through challenges without giving in to pain, fear, or discomfort, and to develop a voice of equanimity or a voice of purpose, that sits sort of above the body. And I think, in terms of cultivation, right? What are we cultivating, right? What are we cultivating, right? We're cultivating awareness, and a greater awareness generally would feel hopefully less anxious because
mm,
awareness that sees the bigger picture will feel less anxious about what's happening like in the moment.
sure.
Um, so, again, it's kind of an interesting question, really. What does cultivation mean? Are we talking about body? Are we talking about mind? Where does it really blend?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll probably have to do another series or another
Well,
episode.
I think
Cultivate.
one of the things, so maybe we'll, kind of move towards the latter part of our discussion here. You had mentioned earlier, and I'll jog your memory about it now, with using the body as a cultivating something via the body, right? If you
Mhm.
part of our discussion, if you want to touch on this, I think that'd be a good place to put it now.
Um, well, I think I'm probably gonna end up stealing something from words I've heard from you. I mean, the
Sure.
body is an advent is a it's a vehicle to generate and experience pleasure. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and something that came to me early on in my medical practice, was this little quick realization that people are really good at pointing out what doesn't feel good in their bodies.
Yes.
We're very adept at going to the doctor and saying, this hurts. This feels bad. This doesn't feel good. I don't like this. This concerns me. No one ever just shows up to anyone and says, you know what? I feel great today. My feet feel good. My tummy feels great. Everything's awesome, right? So we have a hard time, and I just don't think we've been culturally educated in this way or like encouraged to even think in this way. Um, we have a hard time identifying goodness and positivity within ourselves, maybe physically, maybe psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and maybe even in the whole world as a projection of that.
Hmm.
So we can use, it's been my experience, I think you would agree, that we can use the body and mindful physical practices to generate positive emotions and experiences within ourselves. And generating those positive emotions and experiences with ourselves serves as substance to help us carry through day-to-day experiences, because we can recall those emotions and those feelings. Um, kind of harkening back to, pardon, to the catharsis, um, we talked about how catharsis is kind of the first step of the healing process. Um, a lot of the cathartic practices seem to align with what would otherwise be known as like Kundalini awakening practices. Would you agree with this, Daniel?
No, no, not in that sense, because those practices, like when we're talking about cathartic healing, we mentioned a lot. We said the initial stage was like sharing one's healing narrative,
Sure.
and I don't believe that that is part of that particular
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Sure. 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 Sure.
thing.
So I guess when I was referring to cathartic, then I was referring more to physical
Physical
catharsis
catharsis, yeah.
versus maybe like a more gentle, like narrative type of catharsis, or there, yeah, different kind of catharsis.
Well, let me say this, okay? You brought this up, and I want to just open it up a little bit here because it's an important point. And you are talking about, you mentioned saying the body as a vehicle to experience pleasure. And I don't know that I'm going to even say anymore that it's an opportunity. I'm going to say for those who are on the path, it's almost a little bit more of an obligation. Now, that is to be fully aware that you and I both have patients who are chronically ill with
Mhm.
various things, or we'll say chronically afflicted with some various levels of illness, low energy, chronic pain, or whatever. We try and manage these things. So I'm not wiping those things away. I'm aware that
Not disrespectful to what other people are
yeah,
experiencing. This is
totally,
the
totally.
coach.
But at some point, if you can recondition yourself to understand that the body is not the only source, the body is not only a source of discomfort, right? That you do have a mind, that you do have other aspects of yourself, that you can have at least a place of refuge from discomfort. And sometimes the same place that it brings you discomfort also brings you refuge. And if you can spend more time, and again, it's not to um, minimize someone's suffering, but it is also say that like while there is suffering, there is also pleasure possible. And I'm not always saying sexual pleasure or pleasure for food or something like this, but like a general sense of contentedness that brings you a sense of peace so that you are not wanting so much, the levels of desire, you are not driven so intensely by desire, right? That leaves you in a more of a dopamine state, which that drop off happens when the thing is over with. And so to reintegrate or to recultivate or cultivate for beginning purposes your own experience that is moving driven more towards the positive side of things, not as a negation of suffering, but as just a balancing out of a reorganizing of yourself and your experience, because so much of what we deal with in life is negative, the culture and the stresses of money, and like you said, family, nine obstacles, 10 monsters, this book, they have all these various things. that it's important for people to realize that life is not only suffering. Very important.
I think what hits me in maybe a more simple way is just it's the valuization of sensation. Is this
Sure.
sensation good or bad? Right. And like my practice ultimately, sometimes if all I can help someone realize, here's another cultivation practice for you, real practical. Spend a whole day not using the words good and bad to describe things or certain derivatives of, right? And to not live in such a value-based way where something you're feeling has to be either good or bad
Sure.
versus just a feeling, right? And so immediately a feeling is either like, is it a good feeling or is it a bad feeling? It's like, well, let me sit with this feeling and explore the various layers of sensation available to me within this feeling. And I'm sure some of them will be more comfortable than others. And so this isn't maybe a fair sort of thing to throw on top of people who are in chronic pain conditions, right? Maybe we can just look at this with someone who's, of uh
General health.
yeah, general wellness and good standing, right? It's like, the sensations of my clothes on my skin. Is it a good sensation or is it a bad sensation? It's just a sensation, right? And I can spend the entire day exploring the sensations of the clothes on my skin.
Sure.
And that is in and of itself a cultivation. It's an awareness.
Hmm.
So yeah, we went off a little bit off tangent or off subject there, but I guess maybe not though, right? Because I mean
No.
we're using the body, right? And
Yeah.
so I think what I was getting to when we last spoke was more in the line of the concept of alchemy, which is
Yep.
that if our body is potentially holding on to negative emotions and negative energy that over time develop into material illness, then can we use our mind-body connection to transform the vibrational qualities of those energies and emotions into something that is positive and health promoting
There you go.
versus toxic and health um, detrimental? Um,
You answered your own question. That is cultivation.
yeah, there we are. Um, but yeah, that's that's it right there. I guess we're done.
We found it.
Yeah. And
That's it. Yeah. Well, Christian, thanks for coming on and having a good conversation with us. It took us a couple hours to get there, but we did. And for everybody who's listening, I'll leave Christian's contact up and in the beginning of this thing. Listen, we're human beings just like everybody else. We're working through this as we go. This is a live conversation. We kind of have an idea what we're talking about. But as it goes and it unfolds, it takes twists and turns, and inevitably we get to some point where you're just like, yes, that's what we want right there. So I thank you for sharing your story. I thank you for sharing yourself and for your thoughts and your practice. I hope that for people who are listening to this, that you will refer them back to this, new patients, previous patients, and they could hear your thoughts on this particular topic, which is crucial for your practice as it is crucial for my practice, not just with my patients, but with my friendships, and maybe more importantly, with myself as well.
mhm.
And I believe you feel much of the same. Um, Thanks for coming on, audience. Thank you so much for listening. Hit us up in the comments on YouTube or Gin and Tantra podcast on the Instagram. If you want, please feel free to email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com. If you want to get a hold of Christian, just look at the description of this podcast, whether it be on YouTube or wherever else you get your YouTube or your podcast at. It'll be there as well. And for Eric, who is not here, and Christian, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.